Hello, everyone. I think we have over 50 people here now, so I think I'm going to start. Yeah, hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us today for a webinar on consumer acceptance of cultured meat in Europe. I'm Clara Hagedorn. I work for the politics team as well as for ProVeg's satellite project. And yeah, before I introduce ProVeg and the speakers, just a little bit of housekeeping. We will have some time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, so around 15 minutes. So yeah, please write your questions in the comments or into the Q&A box. And yeah, then we will make sure to respond to as many questions as possible. Just to let you know, the webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch afterwards. Yeah, so just very quickly, want to introduce ProVeg. ProVeg is an international food awareness organization with the mission to reduce the global consumption of animal products by 50% by the year 2040. And yeah, so we work to transform the global food system by replacing animal products with plant-based and with cultured alternatives. And yeah, the way we're doing this is we're trying to engage with the public, with policymakers, and with the industry. So for instance, with that on the next slide. Yeah, so for instance, we launched the very first plant-based and cultured incubator in Europe. So we support startups there. We also host a new food conference, which focuses on developments in the plant-based and the cultured space. And yeah, we also collaborated on a study conducted in France and Germany on the consumer acceptance of cultured meat in Europe. And this is actually the study that we want to talk about during this webinar. So please give a warm welcome to our speakers for today. We have Nathalie Roland. She's the executive director of the non-profit agriculture Cellular France. And we have Chris Bryant. He's the director of social science at the Cellular Agriculture Society. And yeah, for further, I'm just going to let them introduce themselves in a bit more detail, and yeah, give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Clara, for the introduction. Yes, I'm Chris Bryant. I've just finished up my PhD at the University of Bath, looking at consumer perceptions of cultured meat. And I'm interested in social psychology and meat consumption, meat reduction, and meat replacement. More broadly, I'm also involved with the social science work at the Cellular Agriculture Society. And I now consult for non-profits and alternative protein companies related to meat reduction and meat replacement through my company, Bryant Research. So my email is there on the slide. And with me presenting is Nathalie Roland.
Hello, so I'm Nathalie Roland. So I've been working on this topic of cellular agriculture for a few years. So I worked with research institutions, with non-profit organizations, and I co-founded Agriculture Cellular France. So it's a French SALAG non-profit, which aims to raise awareness in France on what is cellular agriculture. So we can see that we have a website, so it's only in French for now. But if you want to contact us, there is the email to contact us. So today we are going to present some studies done on cultured meat consumer acceptance in Europe, so on the European markets. And the first, so maybe just as an introduction. So cultured meat is a meat cultured, developed from animal cells. And it has been developed for a few years to offer to the consumers a meat that has a lower environmental impact. But also, so this meat is developed without antibiotic, so it helps combat antibiotic resistance. The small number of animals that we need will also help prevent zoonotic diseases spread. And in terms of animal welfare, so except from the cells that we need to grow the meat. We don't need animals or animal products, and no fetal bovine serum. So it's a serum coming from the blood of bovine fetus. So we need this serum at the very beginning of the research for the development of prototypes, but we don't plan on using this serum in the final products. So because it's not sustainable, not ethical, and way too expensive. So no animal product like the fetal bovine serum will be used in the production of the final products. So we're going to talk about a study that we worked together on with Chris on the French and the German markets. So it was a study with it was an online questionnaire. We worked with Ipsos, and this questionnaire, the participant had to answer this questionnaire in December 2019, so just before the COVID-19 crisis. So we worked with participant, a sample of people representative for the German and the French population, so no student, and we had 1,000 adults in each country. And we asked these people some questions, question about their current meat consumption habits, their intentions to try or buy cultured meat, the importance of different assurances, pressure point on the environment, animal welfare, food safety, antibiotics. For example, we asked the question, would knowing that cultured meat reduces the environmental impact of agriculture make you replace a part of your conventional meat with cultured meat? We also asked the question about their preferences for like a genetically modified meat versus a non-genetically modified meat. We asked questions about their preferences for culture meat versus plant-based meat and insect proteins, and some questions about the demographics, education, employment status, political views, etc. So we asked questions about also their diets, and we observed that it was surprising to see that the majority of the German respondents did not identify as omnivorous, and large portions of participants in both countries also did so. So and also in both countries, we saw that a great number of people regarded themselves as flexitarian. So very large proportion of them. We also asked a question about their intention to reduce their consumption of meat. And we saw that almost 50% intended to reduce their consumption, so in both countries. So it was, again, a great number. And we observed a difference in age. So, so we saw that 61% of the Germans between the age of 18 and 34 intended to reduce their consumption of meat. So it was the group with the largest intention to reduce their consumption of meat. But in France, we saw no significant difference between the age groups. Then, so the next question. So we asked them, so why, what were the reason for reducing their meat consumption? And we saw that for both by the German and French respondents, animal welfare was concern was a major motivator to reduce their consumption of meat. But we have to note that we had a programming error in the survey instrument, and the French were not offered like the answer environment. So it's likely that this omission for the French, this could have led to an increase in the other answers. So this is something to note. And we also observed that the price was a major motivator for the French, and not so much for the Germans. We asked also the question about like, have you heard of this meat before? And we saw that in both countries, most of the participants, they said they never heard of cultured meat before. And we also observed that the women reported more often that they had never heard of this meat before compared to the men. We asked also the participants if they were in favor of the production of this meat. And we saw that in France, respondents tended to be against cultured meat more than in the production of cultured meat more than in favor. The Germans were more supporting of the production of cultured meat in general. And again, about the age in Germany, so the young people, so they were most positive toward the production of cultured meat. In France also, but still, even in France, the group of young people, they were still more against the production of cultured meat than in favor. We asked the question, so would you be willing to taste, to try cultured meat? And we saw that in France, the respondents were quite split quite evenly on the question. The Germans were more willing to try cultured meat again, and we also saw a difference in terms of gender. Men were more significantly more likely to taste cultured meat in both countries. We also asked them, like, well, would you like to buy cultured meat when available? We saw that in Germany, the majority of the people said they would buy cultured meat when available. More than this number. So there were 56% in Germany and 37% in France. So it's less. Again, Germans were more positive. And also, like in both countries, people who have heard of cultured meat before were in general more willing to buy cultured meat. And so we wanted also to ask the question about the genetic modification, GMOs. We asked the participants, would you be willing to replace a part of your conventional meat with cultured meat that is genetically modified or not genetically modified in your daily diet? And we observed that modified food still concerns people, so, and especially in France. So in Germany, the willingness was higher, but still the approval of not modified meat was still considerably higher in both countries. But we can see that the answer yes, in green, it's much more like the number of people willing to replace was much more like higher for non genetically modified meat.
All right, thanks Natalie for taking us through the first half of the results there. So I'll just talk through then the next questions that we were asking people in these samples in France and first in Germany here. So this is data from people's answers to 4 different questions. And it was about various different assurances or pressure points which were relevant to people's decision about whether to eat cultured meat. So you can see here, this is from the results in Germany. The green segments here represent the number of people who said that this factor would motivate them to consume cultured meat. And you can see the one that really is highest than the others is that assurance that cultured meat is free from antibiotics. In particular, we were interested in the difference between the top 2 and the bottom 2 here. So the top 2, benefits for the environment and benefits for animals. These can kind of be construed as social benefits, which accrue to somebody else if you engage in the behavior. Whereas benefits to do with food safety and avoiding antibiotic contamination, well, they accrue to the individual undertaking the behavior. So We're seeing some evidence that benefits which are directly relevant to the individual, i.e. you will have less chance of getting sick from your food, are more relevant than these kind of social benefits, such as this would be good for the environment, this would be good for animals. So this is the first study to kind of get at that, and we can see that difference here somewhat in Germany, and a similar pattern in the results in France as well. You can see a higher proportion of people saying that food safety and antibiotics would motivate them to consume cultured meat compared to assurances about the environment and the effect on animals. So really the takeaway from that part of the study is that the focus on kind of private benefits, which will benefit the customer directly as opposed to social benefits, could be a good way of increasing overall acceptance of cultured meat. So we also featured some comparisons to plant-based meat and also to insects. These are kind of some other forms of alternative proteins which are spoken about alongside cultured meat. And so it's interesting to see how consumers rated their preferences between them. Here we've got the data for cultured meat versus plant-based meat. And the first 4 segments here indicate a preference either for cultured meat in red, or up to a strong preference for plant-based meat in green. And then you also have in blue and in purple the number of people who said that they would eat both, would not eat either, or don't know, prefer not to say. So, well, there's a couple of interesting things to look at here. First of all, you have a higher proportion in France than in Germany saying that they wouldn't eat either cultured meat or plant-based meat. This is kind of consistent with some of the other results that we've seen. The French market seems to be a little more hesitant to adopt these alternative proteins compared to the Germans. We can also see very clearly a lot of people expressing a preference for one or the other, but not necessarily saying that they would eat both. So one interpretation of this is that there is certainly room for more than one alternative product, alternative protein product in this market. We know from previous research that plant-based meat and cultured meat tend to appeal to slightly different audiences. For example, plant-based meat is most often eaten by meat reducers and people with kind of vegetarian inclined diets already, whereas cultured meat tends to be appealing to actually heavier meat eaters. So that's one example of the way that these markets don't line up. So we're seeing some preference overall for cultured meat compared to plant-based meat here. This actually goes against what we've seen in previous research and might be an artifact of the fact that people are towards the end of a survey where they've been reading about cultured meat a lot, so they're kind of primed to choose that option. But it's worth noting that other research generally indicates a higher willingness to eat plant-based compared to cultured meat. Well, the comparison to insects is encouraging. I'll just say a brief few words about insects. Insects are often brought up as an alternative product, alternative protein product alongside cultured meat and plant-based meat. It's actually not something that I support. There is some evidence that insects may have a lower environmental impact per calorie than other food animal species. Although because they require a much higher degree of processing in order to get them to products which are acceptable to consumers, it's not actually clear that they represent an environmental gain necessarily compared to conventional meat products. But more importantly, on the ethical side, we have this kind of effect in meat eating in general where eating smaller animals often entails a higher amount of harm. So basically one example of this is that one cow can yield about 200 meals, whereas one chicken yields about 2 meals. Therefore, you need many more chickens to produce the same amount of meat. And we will see that effect again with respect to insects. So kind of insects are to chickens as chickens are to cows here. We'll need many more of them to produce the same amount of calories. And therefore, it could be a situation which is actually ethically worse. And so with that in mind, we're quite pleased to see a strong preference in both countries for cultured meat over eating insects. And that is generally consistent with results that we've seen from elsewhere. Generally, we see plant-based meat as kind of the most preferred and most familiar alternative protein, followed by cultured meat, and insect-based protein seems to be least appealing of those novel protein sources. We find that here, and we observed it in previous studies as well. So we also ran a regression identifying some of the demographics which predicted higher cultured meat acceptance, and I'll just highlight the key parts here. So we saw higher acceptance in France amongst men compared to women, amongst younger people, and amongst people living in more urban areas compared to rural areas. So we see some similar, although fewer predictors in Germany. We also see being younger as a key predictor. And the key thing that I want to zoom in on here is that we were actually surprised to find that working in animal agriculture or meat production was a predictor of higher acceptance of cultured meat. And I had to look twice at these results to check that we weren't getting it the wrong way around. It seems intuitively like people who are working in the conventional meat industry might be less likely to be in favor of cultured meat production, but that seems not to be the case. And actually digging into that data further, we found, this is not in the publication, but I've since been into the data a little bit further and found actually higher rates of meat avoidance amongst those people who said that they work in animal agriculture or meat production. So certainly interesting to note that one group who we might have thought of as being opposed to this change in meat production are actually more likely to say that they would try and purchase cultured meat as well. So let's go to Natalie briefly we're going to talk about some other studies on consumer acceptance of cultured meat in Europe specifically. And I'll pass over to Natalie briefly to talk about this one in particular that she published last year with Mark Post and others.
I worked with Mark Post at the Maastricht University on a study, with Dutch participants. The participants, they came for a study on meat, with a meat testing, but they didn't know that it was a study on cultured meat before they came to the university. They came to the university. We had almost 2,000 participants who came. Actually, we offered this participant to taste 2 samples of meat. One was labeled as conventional meat and the other one as cultured meat. But in fact, both samples were conventional meat. But we wanted the participant to believe that they were offered to taste cultured meat. So we observed that all of them, all of the participants, they ate the sample labeled as cultured meat. And they also rated this sample of cultured meat tastier than the sample of conventional meat. But in fact, like both samples were the same conventional meat. So we were quite surprised with that. And we also divided this group into 3 subgroups. And each of the 3 groups, they had the information, different type of information. So one group, they had information on the societal benefit of this meat. So the environmental impact, the impact on animal welfare. The second group, they had information on how this meat is produced, what is like nutritional information on it. And the third group, they have no information on the specific benefits of this meat. And we observed that in general, positive information improve the acceptance of the participant, but the information on the personal benefits, so how the meat is produced and the nutritional profile increased even more their acceptance. But in general, we observed that these people were already well informed on the benefit of this meat. Even the third group will receive no information on the specific benefits of this meat. And this study was done in 2017, so quite a long time ago. So I think we had very positive results, because in 2017 the people there, Dutch people, were already very well informed on what is this meat and what are its potential benefits. So we were quite surprised with the result of this study.
That's right. Thank you for walking us through that, Natalie. And I think that even though that was a few years ago, I believe that that's still the only study where people are actually invited to eat what they thought was cultured meat, as opposed to just kind of answering hypothetical questions, online surveys, that kind of thing. So really positive result in Natalie's study there, that everybody did in fact eat the cultured meat. Which is way more than 100% of people ate it, which is obviously higher than any survey had indicated that they might. And interesting to see also some of those results replicated in terms of the personal benefits information being the most persuasive in terms of changing the attitudes. So this is another study which kind of helps to triangulate some of these findings, and one which we just published recently. We were looking at Belgian consumers' attitudes towards cultured meat and also towards plant-based meat in 2009 and 2020. So we had large representative samples, 1,000 people in Belgium in 2019 and 1,000 people again, different people in 2020. And in terms of the rate of cultured meat acceptance, we actually observed no change. So we had in this sample 39% saying that they would eat cultured meat. And we replicated that again in the 2020 wave. So there was no change between the 2 years. However, there was a significant increase in satisfaction with plant-based meat, and a significant increase in concern for the environment. So this is quite substantial to note significant differences in those measures between these two waves, which were taken about 18 months apart. So we observed 44% of Belgians in 2019 saying that they were satisfied with existing meat alternatives. And in 2020, that 44% rose to 51%, saying that they were satisfied with existing meat alternatives. So although we saw no change in attitude towards cultured meat, we did see a large improvement in attitudes towards plant-based meat. So looking elsewhere on the topic of cultured meat, there have been a couple of good studies out of Italy also. This survey of 525 Italian adults found that 54% were willing to try cultured meat. And the major benefits which people tended to perceive are related to animals and the environment, while the major concerns related to safety, nutrition, and taste. And this is interesting. This replicates results from elsewhere as well. These benefits to animals and to a slightly lesser extent to the environment are kind of the most obvious to consumers, the most salient. Obviously this is something that avoids using animals. That's kind of part of the point of it. But as we've shown in a couple of data points here, they might not be the most important. So this is the thing which most people recognize, but it's not necessarily going to be the best information in terms of motivating them to change their behaviors or to improve their attitudes towards cultured meat. And you can see that the major concerns here relating to safety and nutrition and taste, these are things which assurances on these points will be necessary in order to improve consumer perceptions. And so we saw that in this study. The authors found that providing consumers with additional information about cultured meat, so positive information about cultured meat, actually increased the number of people willing to buy cultured meat. Although interestingly, not the number of people willing to try it. So there could be some kind of divide there in terms of the amount of information needed. So there have been a few other studies as well exploring cultured meat acceptance in Germany. There seems to be an area where researchers have particular interest in this topic. So one study with a representative German sample found that 57% said they would try cultured meat and 30% would buy it regularly. It's quite similar to the rates observed here. A study of German school children and adolescents found that young people tend to have a kind of disgust reaction to cultured meat. Although importantly, this is one of the studies that notes that people generally preferred cultured meat to eating insects. So again, that comparison being drawn, and again, we see a clear preference for cultured meat over eating insects. So this is replicated in a few places. And yeah, again, here we can see this finding replicated, that the most often perceived benefits relate to animals and the environment, and safety and nutrition. Again, they're coming up as key consumer concerns and points that consumers will want to be persuaded on. Similar rates of overall acceptance there you can see as well, 60% in that sample saying that they would try and 35% saying that they would buy cultured meat. So I'll just sum up with some other issues for, well, this is kind of a separate part. Some other issues for cultured meat marketers in Europe in particular come from kind of other types of analysis. So overall, we've seen from the data presented so far that there are solid markets for cultured meat in many European countries, potentially. You know, many people, up to around 2/3, saying that they would try cultured meat, and around about 1 in 3 often saying that they would buy cultured meat. However, producers and marketers of cultured meat do need to be aware of potential consumer pushback. In particular, the Sentience Institute has drawn attention to the potential parallels with GMO foods. There's some research to indicate that people are not necessarily distinguishing clearly between these food technologies, and a situation where we see sufficient consumer pushback in the right places or the wrong places, as it may be, could lead to an analogous situation that we have with GMOs, whereby we become unable to reap any of the great benefits of this technology. Focusing on individual benefits is a way to increase consumer appeal. I think that in some ways, compared to GMOs, the advantages of cultured meat are more obvious. You know, a lot of people have the intuition that it would be a good thing if we didn't have to kill animals for food, for example. But really actually focusing on the benefits to me as the consumer is going to be the best way to increase acceptance. So focusing on the healthiness and nutrition of cultured meat, and also framing it as a purer alternative to conventional meat, which doesn't have diseases and contamination and antibiotics and so on, often found in conventional meat products. Cultured meat is a way of removing the dirty animals from the system and having like a purer product. So that's going to be, I think, a key message to increase acceptance. Regulation in Europe is to be navigated through the EU's novel food regulations. And there are, I believe, some companies going through that process currently, or perhaps starting it. And there may also be some country level regulations to contend with, particularly with respect to labeling. So labeling could be subject to challenges similar to those on plant-based products. Many people on the call, I'm sure, are aware of ProVeg's fantastic work around the Veggie Burger Ban and Amendment 171 about plant-based dairy products in Europe. Basically, the story here is animal farmers and animal farming lobbies trying to restrict the terminology that can be used in the marketing of plant-based products so as to limit their consumer appeal. I think it's likely that we will see similar things applied to the cellular agriculture space, cultured meat. Can you call it meat, for example? I think that with regard to this issue in particular, cellular agriculture products maybe in a better position than plant-based products. And part of the reason for that is because they are the same content at microscopic level. And so for that reason, clear labeling will eventually be required, particularly for consumers with allergies. If you're allergic to meat, you're also going to be allergic to cultured meat. And so as a result of that, there could be more likely to be kind of aligned labeling for cellular agriculture products compared to plant-based products. So thank you very much for following along, and we've plenty of time for some questions now. So unless anyone on the team would like to say anything, I guess I will open the floor for questions.
Yes, so we did get a couple of questions. So the first one was regarding your study. So the question was, when it comes to replacing conventional meat with either GMO or non-GMO, were only the ones who expressed interest in cultured meat asked?
So I think the question is about, we have, let me see if I can, I guess I'm doing it this way. Yes, so we had the comparison of people who said that they would eat. Here we go, this is it. The comparison of people who said that they would replace conventional meat with cultured meat that is from GMOs here. And here is the proportion of people who said that they would replace conventional meat with non-GMO cultured meat here. So what was the question again, Clara? Could you repeat?
So when it comes to replacing conventional meat with like either GMO or non-GMO, were only the ones who expressed interest in cultured meat asked?
That is a good question. For many of these, we do have they were only some of the respondents. I think that question in particular was asked of everyone, unless you know differently, Natalie. Did we perhaps exclude people who said that they were not interested at all in eating cultured meat?
I think yes. Let me check my notes. But, for the question, I tend to reduce. It was for participants who indicated that they currently eat meat. And that's all. Yeah. Yeah.
So we did have some restrictions for some of the questions. For example, the intending to reduce was only for people who already ate meat. That's like an example of one of the restrictions. But do you know if we have restrictions on this question about GMO versus non-GMO? I think that it was everyone.
Maybe I'm not sure. So maybe it was for the people willing to replace. No, I will have to check to make sure of that.
Okay, yeah. Perhaps we can look at the detail of that and email that person. Yeah, we'll have to refer to the paper to answer that in particular.
Sure. So we actually have another question on GMOs. Does it imply that consumers believe cultured meat is GMO? Do you think that's true?
Yeah, well, there is some evidence that people are not particularly sophisticated at distinguishing between different types of food technology, and that they kind of use similar patterns of thinking in terms of this is GMO, this is cultured meat. For some people, it's just basically shorthand for science in food. So some people will not be making that distinction. I would say that this large difference that we see here with respect to the GMO question, so we can see, it's around about 50-50 in Germany saying that they would eat it, and a little over a quarter in France, and then increasing to like 90% plus when talking about non-GMO cultured meat. I would say that the reason for that is a kind of assurance that this is only so different from what you know already, you know. Probably what's happening here is that non-GMO in this context is acting as kind of a signal of, you know, a natural product or a normal product that you're used to. And people are interpreting that much more favorably. When we have, you know, obviously in actual fact, GMO cultured meat is unlikely to be permitted to be sold in Europe. But yeah, interesting to note here that when not using any genetic modification technology and making that kind of a feature of the cultured meat product and something that the manufacturer can point to, there is the potential of kind of assuaging some of that naturalness concern and boosting acceptance quite a bit.
So I found the answer, like the restriction question about the GMO question. So the target group, it was the respondent who were willing to replace their consumption of conventional meat with cultured meat. So only these people were asked about GMO or not GMO meat.
Excellent. Thank you so much for looking that up, Natalie. So yeah, that was the answer to the first question then. Hey, these questions were only asked of people who had already answered yes to willing to replace conventional meat. So we had like, would you try it? Would you buy it? And then would you replace it? Which is not shown here. But if they answered yes to willing to replace, so we're probably looking at around a third of the sample or less than that, perhaps. Of those people, this is the percentage who said that they would replace with GMO cultured meat and would replace with non-GMO. That makes sense because this is almost everyone on the on the second one, right?
Yeah, so on GMO, we actually have another question. So there was a similar survey in Japan, and some percentage of the people confused GMOs with cultured products. And yeah, so the person says that they think it's necessary to educate the general people about cellular technology and basic biology. So do you think, would you agree to that? And are there any activities being done on that already?
Yeah, it's a great point. There's kind of data to support that as well. We've got a few things which we mentioned about studies showing that giving people additional information about the technology can increase acceptance. And we also see that people who are more familiar with the technology are more likely to say that they would eat cultured meat as well. So it does seem like there's some positive effect of having some kind of educational efforts going on, or at least putting the concept in people's minds. You know, we're seeing in some of the data here, the familiarity data here, we've got like over, you know, most people in both of these countries have never heard of cultured meat at all. So there's certainly room for, yeah, just consciousness raising, I guess, and education about the technology. We can see, yeah, I mean, it's quite encouraging in one sense, really, when you think about this, because we're seeing already quite high willingness to try and willingness to buy. For example, here in Germany, we have over 60% saying that they're willing to try. And, you know, by mathematical deduction, we know that some proportion of those people are willing to try, never having heard of it before. And we know that higher familiarity increases willingness to try. So yes, to the person's question, yes, I think that this data kind of supports the idea that there's plenty of room for quite large scale educating and you know, just raising awareness of this as a class of product.
Yeah, thank you. So we have another question, not about GMO, but on insects. So it's asked that insects are probably something that you can use to increase the protein level in a different food and not consume directly. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so the research I'm aware of on consumer perceptions of insect as food generally indicates that most people in Western countries are basically quite unwilling to eat like whole insects. There has been some moderate success with things like cricket flour and like crisps made of insects and that kind of thing. But yes, generally there's quite a high degree of processing required to go from insects to like forms of food which people are at all interested in buying. And some analyses indicate that there's such a degree of processing going on there that you kind of end up cancelling out some of the environmental benefits that you are trying to pursue by avoiding meat in the first place.
So we have another question on the plant-based meat market. So even though plant-based meat alternatives are on the market for a longer time, why do you think that there's actually preference for cultured meat?
Yeah, I want to let Natalie speak a bit. I feel like I'm hogging all the questions. Yeah, I would say just briefly, that is kind of contrary to most of the other data that is out there on that topic. Probably what we're seeing is that this survey was all about cultured meat. They were reading the term cultured meat lots. They were like reading information about cultured meat and so on. So by the time that they answered the preference question, there's probably a good degree of priming going on. But in other more like neutrally framed studies where they're not asking mainly about cultured meat, they're just asking generally about a range of alternatives, we tend to see actually higher proportions of people saying that they would eat plant-based compared to cultured meat.
Then there's a specific question on the UK. Is there any research available about UK consumer attitudes?
Yes, there is. There are at least a few surveys that have been done in the UK. Let's think of some interesting ones to talk about. Yeah, there was a couple of early ones which indicated around about 1 in 5 people already saying that they would eat cultured meat. That was a few years ago. And then there was one study which I used to cite quite a bit of a survey which was done in the UK and the US. And that particular survey seemed to find a much higher proportion of Americans saying that they would eat cultured meat compared to the British. But actually, there's been a more thorough comparison on that recently, which has actually found no difference and found like reasonably high levels of acceptance in the UK and the US both. So I used to say on the basis of that study that like acceptance of cultured meat in Europe would probably be lower than in the States. But actually now I'm not so sure on that topic. It seems that, yeah, the majority of early consumer surveys in the UK found about 1 in 5 people saying that they would eat it. It's possible that that has increased over time as more people learn about it, becomes more familiar and so on. Yeah, anything to add to that, Natalie?
Yeah, maybe it's also depend on the if we talk about the European markets, it depends on which country we're talking about, because maybe in the Netherlands we have much more positive results than maybe the States, and also maybe than other European markets. So yeah, I think in Europe, like yeah, we might have some very different results depending on the countries, but I think it also depends on the level of familiarity of the people with that, the information they have, the quality of the information. So yeah, to me, like the level of information is very, very important, and for the acceptance.
Yeah, it seems to be with respect to plant-based meat that the Netherlands, as Natalie mentioned, and also the UK are, and Germany as well, are 3 countries with quite promising markets for and production of those products. We could see a similar profile of kind of front runners in Europe with respect to cultured meat. Certainly the Netherlands has some of the furthest along cultured meat companies, including Mosa Meat. And the UK has its fair share of cultured meat companies as well. So perhaps you'll see those kind of countries being amongst the best markets again for cultured meat.
Thank you. So we have a questions on the factors of influence. So the role of working in the animal agriculture sector was like, you had quite interesting results on that. Could you elaborate on that? Because yeah, it seems like quite a niche demographic.
Yeah, so this was surprising. So we had a question in the survey which was just yes, no, as to whether they work in animal agriculture or meat production. We had in the ballpark of 5% people in both countries saying that they did work in those industries. So it's worth noting that it's like a pretty small number of people that this is based on. But actually it came up as a predictor in both countries, as you can see. So this was for purchase intent of cultured meat, but we see similar things on the other variables measured, and also on diet, as I mentioned. We had that there's like a higher proportion of vegetarians, vegans, and pescatarians in those small number of people who said that they work in animal agriculture compared to the general population. So yeah, it's not quite clear what is going on there. I'm actually doing at the moment some further analysis to kind of investigate that, looking at the reasons given for meat avoidance by those people compared to the general population. Yeah, it is difficult to know really what's going on there, and certainly it is counterintuitive. It's kind of backwards to what you might have guessed, like animal farmers are likely to be opposed to this. There's a couple of things that I can think of. One might be that it could be the majority of people answering yes to that are like just like farm workers as opposed to farm owners. So if you're somebody who like just works in the slaughterhouse, you know, you don't necessarily care that much about the future of the meat market in that sense, as opposed to if you like own an animal farm. So that could be one possible thing that's going on there. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of guesswork, really. One thing that I will say, and I'll invite Natalie to give to kind of speculate on the reasons here as well. We're looking further at this interesting result. There is some evidence that a good number of people involved in animal farming are actually ambivalent about the morality of doing that. It could be for many people that they kind of inherit the family farm or something. They're kind of born into this line of work, but many people who rear animals or kill and process animals for a living are not necessarily certain about the morality of doing that. And interestingly, that's not something which is polite to talk about in such circles as well. So many people in that situation will be not necessarily making that known, that they feel that way. So I think that there could be some kind of moral ambivalence about killing animals for food in general, and then perhaps some portion of those people are seeing cultured meat as a way out of that system. I don't know. Natalie, any speculations to add to mine?
That's difficult to really have an idea on why. I don't know, but just maybe as an example, like my family, they used to have their own farm, to own their own farm, and they are very enthusiastic about this idea of being able to produce meat without killing animals, because they like to work with animals, but they don't like the idea of killing them. So yeah, they guess that these people might just be interested in with the idea of working with animal, working in the nature, closely with the nature and the animals, and just with a happy end maybe.
Yeah.
And also maybe they also understand that no, the situation is different, like the impact on the environment. Maybe in the past they were not thinking about it, like the impact on of animal farming on the environment, and now we are much more aware of that, maybe more sensitive. So maybe they also Bryant start to realize that we have to do something and to find alternatives. And also maybe maybe also depend on what we are talking about, like replacing industrial animal farming or traditional animal farming. Maybe it's also depend on that. I guess we would need more studies to have a better sense on why these people entered that and why they were avoiding meat and interesting in and in the production of cultured meat. Yeah, it's difficult to know, I think. At the moment.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'll just add as well that I think that including the meat industry at multiple levels is really important in this protein transition, and where there are opportunities to involve animal farmers in moving to cellular agriculture, or some of the types of farming that will be required to go into that, for example, growing the ingredients needed for culture medium, for example. It would be an excellent thing for companies to support farmers in moving in that direction, and where possible to adopt production techniques which can include those people as well. So there is some talk in the industry about doing kind of decentralized, small scale cultured meat production, which could be done on former animal farms, and thereby, minimizing the disruption to those supply chains. So I think that is well worth exploring for cultured meat producers.
Thank you. And we have another question to the price. So is there any research which points to a price point where cultured meat would be way more likely to appeal to consumers than conventional meat? Because we can, it seems to have an implication with plant-based meat alternatives at the moment already.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that it's going to be a similar trajectory in some ways to plant-based meat, in the sense of really price parity, and eventually getting below the price of conventional meat will be really the key thing to see, or one of the key things to see mass adoption of these products. Like when we get to the point where it is actually more expensive if you want the meat from an animal now. I think that will be the point where, the bulk of people who aren't necessarily super concerned with the environmental impact or whatever else will switch over. But the price trajectory is an interesting discussion, because it's likely that the first cultured meat products available to consumers will be much more expensive than conventional meat. Now, the majority of consumers are not willing to pay more for cultured meat than they would be for conventional meat. But there will be some niche of people who are basically just technophiles and love new technology and new things, and who are very enthusiastic about many of the benefits that cultured meat can bring. Perhaps some of those people are on this call. Will be excited to be the first in line at the fancy restaurant in Singapore, which will serve cultured chicken for, I think, about $20 a go. So there will be those people in the kind of early adopters willing to pay that higher price, but in the longer term, getting the price down to price parity, and hopefully eventually below the price of conventional meat, which should be possible given that the inputs required are fewer, and particularly that difference could be exacerbated by carbon taxes or meat taxes, which come in affecting products from animals but not affecting cellular agriculture or plant-based products. So I think in the long term, the price differential will be in favor of alternative protein products. Right now, that's not the case, and consumers still need to pay more for these products. And, perhaps there's some kind of premium perception to be had from that price as well. I think that for some plant-based products, it's actually been part of their marketing strategy, basically, to say, this is a higher price point, and people are inferring kind of product quality or status from that price. So there can be some advantages to that as well, although I think in the long term, the low price will be absolutely necessary.
I just wanted to add that in the study we've done at the Maastricht University, so with people well informed on what is sculpture meat, the majority of them they said that they were fine paying a premium for this meat. So maybe with population well informed on the sculpture meat and its benefits, we have many people willing to pay more for this meat, at least in the beginning.
Thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time for more questions. So if you want to learn more about this topic, make sure to visit our website for upcoming webinars. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, Natalie and Chris, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Clara. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.